All right, this is our final book of the Odyssey, book 24. It's called Warriors Farewell. So, here are the main things that happen. First, we see Agamemnon in the underworld, and then Agamemnon's ghost tells about the funeral of Achilles. Amphimedon's ghost talks about the fate of the suitors, and then we get back to Odysseus. He goes and finds Laertes in his orchard, decides whether or not he's going to tell who he is right away. He pretends to be somebody else, and then one of the men, Dolius, does recognize Odysseus. He joins the crew. The Ithacans, the townspeople, gather. They say they got to get revenge for all their sons who are dead. Athena is watching all this, and she says to Zeus, hey, what's your will? Do you want them to fight it out? What do you want? And he basically says he wants peace, and so Athena goes down. She makes sure the worst families get killed, and then in the end, she's kind of warned by Zeus. He throws a thunderbolt at her feet and is kind of like, hey, remember, daughter, I said I wanted peace, and so she does bring peace. So just kind of going through some key things before I read it. This does put closure on that whole episode of Troy, because this is like a sequel to the Iliad. The suitors' ghosts head to the underworld. There is kind of a fun Homeric simile comparing these men's ghosts to bats. I thought that was funny. We have kind of this wrap up in the underworld, and then we get done with that, and Odysseus ponders how to approach Laertes. We've seen him pondering how to approach someone, Penelope pondering how to approach someone, and now Odysseus again pondering. So he decides to lie, say he once hosted Odysseus, and he's trying to look him up to have Odysseus host him in return. There's some really fun puns I'll point out as we read that part, and he makes up who he is. This actually makes Laertes really sad because he's already missing Odysseus, but this just brings it all up, and he starts throwing dirt on himself and covering his head with dust, and seeing this makes Odysseus then feel guilty. So he's like, oh, no, after all, it's me, Dad. I killed all the suitors. But Laertes is in this cloud of pain, kind of a fun metaphor that is used. And he says, I need proof. And of course, Odysseus is like, I got the scar. But then Odysseus also tells about these trees that he got when he turned 13. There were pear trees, apple trees, fig trees, and some vines. And so seems like that's proof enough. Laertes believes it's Odysseus. And he also says, well, you know, if those suitors really paid for their crimes, then Zeus must indeed be in charge of Olympus. Kind of like that's a clincher. So now Athena makes Laertes look godlike and makes him look young again, and Odysseus kind of marvels at his appearance. And we do find out Zeus wants peace in Ithaca. He drops this thunderbolt from the sky at Athena's feet when Odysseus was going to follow the running townspeople and get more revenge. And so it's kind of like, Athena, I said peace. He's being Big Daddy Zeus. And so now that she's been reminded, Athena commands Odysseus to call off the battle, and she oversees the peace. Going back just a little bit, when those townspeople initially were gathering and they found out their sons were dead, there was this seer, Halitherses Masterides, and he had said, no chase, or he who wants a bloody end will find it. So in other words, this is a guy who can tell the future, and he says they're not going to win, but they go anyway, which is, I don't know, it's kind of ironic that they think they can still go against the gods, because we have seen time and time again in this whole epic tale that you're not going to win against the gods. So just note on how Homer closes the Odyssey. He lets Athena speak the actual last words that are spoken by anyone. I mean, he has a little text beyond that, but because he lets Athena say the last words, you'll see them in quotation marks. This is kind of showing the respect for the gods, because remember, he started with an invocation to the muse, so it's only appropriate that he kind of ends by honoring the gods. And there's this resolution. Peace is finally established. Both parties swear to terms of peace while Athena's the arbiter. We don't find out, as the Odyssey ends, about that ore trip that Odysseus has to go on. If he found a good place to plant it or not, we can only assume he does. But like I had said in a different video, it seems like the Odyssey is similar to The Hobbit, and it could have ended here, could have ended here, could have ended here, but no, it keeps going. So I'm sure you are relieved that it is finally the last book, and then that one's done. So, starting out at the beginning of book 24. Meanwhile, the suitors' ghosts were called away by Hermes of Kyllene, bearing the golden wand with which he charms the eyes of men or wakens whom he wills. Okay, so just a reminder, we talked about this when we studied mythology, but Hermes is the god who escorts souls to the underworld. All right. He waved them on, squeaking as bats will in a cavern's underworld, all flitting, crisscross in the dark, if one falls and the rock-hung chain is broken. So with faint cries the shades trailed after Hermes, pure deliverer. He led them down dank ways, over gray ocean tides and the snowy rock, past shores of dream and narrows of the sunset, in swift flight to where the dead inhabit wastes of asphodel at the world's end. Crossing the plain, they met Achilles' ghost, Patroclus and Antilochus, then Ajax, noblest of Danaans after Achilles in strength and beauty. Here, the newly dead drifted together whispering. Then came the soul of Agamemnon, son of Atreus, in black pain forever, surrounded by men-at-arms who perished with him in Aegisthus' hall. Achilles greeted him. So, we have these suitors huddling together, and then they watch a conversation between Achilles and Agamemnon. So what you can anticipate is they may bring up some of the same things we've heard before about Agamemnon being killed by his disloyal wife Clytemnestra and so on and so forth. We'll see here. My lord Atreides, we held that Zeus, who loves the play of lightning, would give you length of glory. You were king over so great a host of soldiery before Troy, where we suffered, we Achaeans. But in the morning of your life, that means when he was still very young, you met that doom that no man born avoids. It should have found you in our day of victory, marshal of the army in Troy country. Then all Achaea would have heaped your tomb and saved your honor for your son. Instead, piteous death awaited you at home. And Atreus' son replied, Fortunate hero, son of Peleus, godlike and glorious, at Troy you died, across the sea from Argos, and round you Trojan and Achaean peers fought for your corpse and died. A dust cloud wrought by a whirlwind hid the greatness of you slain, minding no more the mastery of horses. All that day we might have toiled in battle, had not a storm from Zeus broken it off. We carried you out of the field of war down to the ships and bathed your comely body with warm water and scented oil. We laid you upon your long bed, and our officers wept hot tears like rain and cropped their hair. Cutting their hair was a way to show their sorrow as well. Then hearing of it in the sea, your mother Thetis came with Nereids of the gray wave, crying unearthly lamentation over the water, and trembling gripped the Achaeans to the bone. So Achilles' mom came along with these sort of water nymphs, and everybody's crying, and the Achaeans were kind of like, uh-oh, what's going to happen next? They would have boarded ship that night and fled, except for one man's wisdom, venerable Nestor, proven counselor in the past. He stood and spoke to allay their fear. Hold fast, sons of the Achaeans, lads of Argos. His mother it must be, with nymphs her sisters, come from the sea to mourn her son in death. Veteran hearts at this contained their dread, while at your side the daughters of the ancient sea god wailed and wrapped ambrosial ambrosial shrouding around you. So they were kind of scared because the water was so swirly and mixed up. But what these women were doing was actually wrapping Achilles in special burial cloths. Then we heard the muses sing a threnody in 9 immortal voices. No Argive there but wept. Such keening rose from that one muse who led the song. Now 7 days and 10, 7 nights and 10, we mourned you. We mortal men with nymphs who know no death, before we gave you to the flame, slaughtering longhorn steers and fat sheep on your pyre. Dressed by the Nereids and embalmed with honey and unguent in the seething blaze, you turned to ash. And past the pyre, Achaea's captains paraded in review, in arms, clattering chariot teams and infantry. Like a forest fire, the flame roared on and burned your flesh away. So we get to hear all about the funeral rites, the burning, and so on. Next day at dawn, Achilles, we picked your pale bones from the char to keep in wine and oil. So after they burned all the flesh, then they pick out the bones and they bottle them in wine and oil. Kind of like a cremation, but not exactly. A golden amphora your mother gave for this Hephaestus work, a gift from Dionysus. In that vase, Achilles' hero, lie your pale bones, mixed with mild Patroclus' bones, who died before you, and nearby lie the bones of Antilochus, the one you cared for most of all the companions after Patroclus. We, of the old army, we who were spearmen, heaped a tomb for these upon a foreland over Hellas waters, to be a mark against the sky for voyagers in this generation and those to come. Your mother sought from the gods magnificent trophies and set them down midfield for our champions, often at funeral games after the death of kings. When you yourself contended, you've seen athletes cinch their belts when trophies went on view. But these things would have made you stare. The treasures Thetis on her silver slippered feet brought to your games, for the gods held you dear. So again, more about the funeral. It's as if Achilles wouldn't have known any of this, so Agamemnon is telling him. So all the gods and goddesses chipped in when Thetis came asking and gave some pretty royal gifts, and now everybody is going to try to get these things. You perished, but your name will never die. It lives to keep all men in mind of honor forever, Achilles. As for myself, what joy is this to have brought off the war? Foul death Zeus held in store for me at my coming home. Aegisthus and my vixen cut me down. Notice he doesn't even say his wife anymore. Now she's just a vixen. While they conversed, the wayfinder, that's Hermes, came near, leading the shades of suitors overthrown by Lord Odysseus. The two souls of heroes advanced together, scrutinizing these. Okay, so Achilles and Agamemnon are looking at this little group of guys Hermes is leading on. Then Agamemnon recognized Amphimedon. He was really like the best of the worst. So he was one of the suitors who wasn't quite so evil, I guess. Son of Melanius, friends of his on Ithaca, and called out to him, Amphimedon, what ruin brought you into this undergloom? All in a body, picked men, and so young? One could not better choose the kingdom's pride. Were you at sea aboard ship, and Poseidon blew up a dire wind and foundering waves? Or cattle raiding? Were you on the mainland? Or in a fight for some stronghold? Or women? When the foe hit you to your mortal hurt? So he guesses some ways that they might have died. Tell me, answer my question. Guest and friend, I say, I am of yours. Or do you not remember I visited your family there? I came with Prince Menelaus, urging Odysseus to join us in the great sea raid on Troy. 1 solid month we beat our way, breasting South Sea and West, resolved to bring him round, the wily raider of cities. So they had to sail for about a month and wanted to have Odysseus join them in their battle against Troy. So now we turn over to the suitors' point of view. The new shade said, O glory of commanders, Agamemnon, all that you bring to mind I remember well. As for the sudden manner of our death, I'll tell you of it clearly, first to last. After Odysseus had been gone for years, we were all suitors of his queen. She never quite refused, nor went through with a marriage, hating it, ever bent on our defeat. Here's one of her tricks. She placed her loom, her big loom, out for weaving in her hall, and the fine warp of some vast fabric on it. We were attending her, and she said to us, "Young men, my suitors, now my lord is dead. Let me finish my weaving before I marry, or else my thread will have been spun in vain." So they're saying she proposed this trick, which I think that's the same as all the other accounts. But they also are saying she said her lord was dead. I don't know that we've had that another time. It's almost like they're trying to make her look worse in front of these shades. The other thing I want to point out is when she says, "My thread will have been spun in vain," she's not talking about the loom. She's actually talking about her life, because there's this Greek belief that everybody has this thread, and then it is the fates who snip your thread of life when it's time for you to die. And so she feels like if she doesn't do something for Laertes, to show herself to be a good daughter-in-law, then she would have been living in vain. "This is a shroud I weave for Lord Laertes when cold death comes to lay him on his bier. The country wives would hold me in dishonor if he with all his fortune lay unshrouded. We had men's hearts. She touched them. We agreed. So every day she wove on the great loom, but every night by torchlight she unwove it. And so for 3 years she deceived the Achaeans. But when the seasons brought the fourth around, as long months waned, and the slow days were spent, one of her maids who knew the secret told us. We found her unraveling the splendid shroud, and then she had to finish, willy-nilly finish, and show the big loom woven tight from beam to beam with cloth. She washed the shrouding clean as sun or moonlight. Then, heaven knows from what quarter of the world, fatality brought in Odysseus to the swineherd's wood far up the island. There his son went too, when the black ship put him ashore from Pylos. The two together planned our death trap. Down they came to the famous town, Telemachus, long in advance. We had to wait for Odysseus. The swineherd led him to the manor later, in rags like a foul beggar, old and broken, propped on a stick. These tatters that he wore hid him so well that none of us could know him when he turned up, not even the older men. We jeered at him, took pot shots at him, cursed him. Daylight and evening in his own great hall, he bore it, patient as a stone. That night the mind of Zeus beyond the storm cloud stirred him, with Telemachus at hand to shift his arms from Megaron to storage room and lock it. Then he assigned his wife her part. Now, this is what the suitors think, but this is actually an idea that Penelope had without Odysseus saying anything to her. But they think he had plotted with her to be part of it. Then he assigned his wife her part. Next day she brought his bow and iron axe heads out to make a contest. Contest there was none. That move doomed us to slaughter. Not a man could bend the stiff bow to his will or string it until it reached Odysseus. We shouted, "Keep the royal bow from the beggar's hands, no matter how he begs." Only Telemachus would not be denied. So the great soldier took his bow and bent it for the bowstring effortlessly. He drilled the axe heads clean, sprang and decanted arrows on the doorsill, glared, and drew again. Okay, so as we see over and over again with the Odyssey, parts get repeated in case you missed it one of the other times. So that's that whole bow and arrow contest. We just heard it again. And we're going to hear about the killing of the suitors. But again, this time we're hearing it from their viewpoint. So you see how some of the facts are shifting. This time he killed Antinous. There, facing us, he crouched and shot his bolts of groaning at us, brought us down like sheep. Then some god, his familiar, that's Athena, went into action with him round the hall after us in a massacre. Men lay groaning, mortally wounded, and the floor smoked with blood. There we get some imagery again. If you think about it, if the body temperature is 98.6 and there's lots of blood around, yeah, it would look like it's smoking. That was the way our death came, Agamemnon. Now in Odysseus's hall, untended still, our bodies lie, unknown to friends or kinsmen, who should have laid us out and washed our wounds free of the clotted blood and mourned our passing. So much is due the dead. Okay, so they're kind of whining here, telling Agamemnon what should have been done to take care of their bodies. But Agamemnon's tall shade, when he heard this, cried aloud, "O fortunate Odysseus, master mariner and soldier, blessed son of old Laertes." Notice how some of these epithets have changed. Fortunate Odysseus, blessed son. Up until this point, he's really had some more negative epithets applied that show how much he's been suffering. And now, again, we see how wonderful Penelope is. "The girl you brought home made a valiant wife, true to her husband's honor and her own. Penelope, Icarus's faithful daughter. The very gods themselves will sing her story for men on earth. Mistress of her own heart, Penelope." Now he talks about his wife. "Tyndareus' daughter waited too, how differently. Clytemnestra, the adulteress, waited to stab her lord and king. That song will be forever hateful, a bad name she gave to womankind, even the best." So he doesn't say anything about Odysseus being good or bad and killing off the suitors. Instead, he just focuses on wives. These were the things they said to one another under the rim of earth where death is lord. Now we get a switch back to Odysseus and what he's doing. Remember, Telemachus, the swineherd, the cowherd, they all headed off to see Laertes. And Athena had hidden them in a darkness. Leaving the town, Odysseus and his men that morning reached Laertes' garden lands, long since won by his toil from wilderness, his homestead, and the row of huts around it, where field hands rested, ate, and slept. Indoors, he had an old slave woman, a cycle, keeping house for him in his secluded age. Odysseus here took leave of his companions. "Go make yourselves at home inside," he said. "Roast the best porker and prepare a meal. I'll go to try my father. Will he know me? Can he imagine it after 20 years? So Odysseus heads on his own. He handed spear and shield to the two herdsmen, and in they went, Telemachus too. Alone, Odysseus walked the orchard rows and vines. He found no trace of Dolius and his sons, nor the other slaves, all being gone that day to clear a distant field and drag the stones for a boundary wall. But on a well-banked plot, Odysseus found his father in solitude, spading the earth around a young fruit tree. He wore a tunic patched and soiled, and leggings, oxhide patches, bound below his knees against the brambles, gauntlets on his hands, and on his head a goatskin cowl of sorrow. Okay, so basically Laertes is dressed in his grubby home clothes with patches all over the place and not looking so good. This was the figure Prince Odysseus found, wasted by years, racked, bowed under grief. The son paused by a tall pear tree and wept. Then inwardly debated. Should he run forward and kiss his father and pour out his tale of war, adventure, and return? Or should he first interrogate him? Test him. Better that way, he thought. First draw him out with sharp words, trouble him. His mind made up, he walked ahead. Laertes went on digging. Head down by the sapling, stamping the spade in. At his elbow then, his son spoke out. "Old man, the orchard keeper you work for is no townsman. Good eye for growing things he has. There's not a nursling, fig tree, vine stalk, olive tree, or pear tree, or garden bed uncared for on this farm. But, I might add, don't take offense. Your own appearance could be tidier." So he gives his dad a sort of compliment, but then on how good all the plants look, but then says, "You look like a slob." "Old age, yes, but why the squalor and rags to boot? It would not be for sloth now that your master leaves you in this condition, neither at all because there's any baseness in yourself. No, by your features, by the frame you have, a man might call you kingly." One who should bathe warm, sup well, and rest easy in age is privilege. But tell me, who are your masters? Whose fruit trees are these you tend here? So he's pretending to think that his father is some sort of slave, and that he does look kingly, but, you know, if he's really a lord or something like that, he wouldn't be working in the garden like this. Tell me if it's true this island is Ithaca, as that fellow I fell in with told me on the road just now. He had a peg loose, that one. Couldn't say a word or listen when I asked about my friend, my Ithacan friend. So Odysseus starts making up this story that he wants to know, is this really Ithaca? I met some guy, but that guy was kind of crazy. I asked if he were alive or gone long since into the underworld. I can describe him, if you care to hear it. I entertained the man in my own land when he turned up there on a journey. Never had I a guest more welcome in my house. He claimed his stock was Ithacan. Laertes Arcesiades, he said, his father was. So now we get a little more story that he had hosted Odysseus, and now he's shown up here to see if Odysseus will host him in return. And he doesn't really say that it's Odysseus, but he says Laertes had been his father. So I took him home, treated him well, grew fond of him, though we had many guests, and gave him gifts in keeping with his quality. 7 bars of measured gold, a silver wine bowl, filigreed with flowers, 12 light cloaks, 12 rugs, robes, and tunics, not to mention his own choice of women trained in service. The 4 well-favored ones he wished to take, so those were gifts that supposedly he gave Odysseus, which is strange. Anyway, his father's eyes had filled with tears. He said, "You've come to that man's island, right enough, but dangerous men and fools hold power now. You gave your gifts in vain. If you could find him here in Ithaca alive, he'd make returns of gifts and hospitality, as custom is when someone has been generous. But tell me accurately, how many years have now gone by since that man was your guest? Your guest, my son, if he indeed existed, born to ill fortune as he was. Far from those who loved him, far from his native land. In some sea dingle fish have picked his bones, or else he made the vultures and wild beasts a trove ashore. His mother at his bier never bewailed him, nor did I. His father, nor his admirable wife, Penelope, who should have closed her husband's eyes in death and cried aloud upon him as he lay. So much is due the dead." This is the second time in this book when we hear this line, "due the dead." So Laertes kind of questions Odysseus, how long ago was he your guest? Because, you know, if there's hope, maybe Odysseus is alive, but Laertes is saying, nah, he died. Dinglefish have picked his bones, like he died in the sea and they ate him, or vultures and wild beasts ate him. And he's saying how they never got to mourn him. Penelope should have been sprawled out on top of his corpse and cried. Anyway, but speak out. Tell me further. Who are you? Of what city and family? Where have you moored the ship that brought you here? Where's your admirable crew? Are you a peddler put ashore by the foreign ship you came on? Again, Odysseus had a fable ready. Okay, now listen to this wordplay. Yes, he said, I can tell you all those things. I come from Rover's Passage, where my home is, and I'm King Allwo's only son. My name is Quarrelman. Okay, Rover's Passage, because a rover is somebody who just goes traveling. He just spent 10 years traveling. And Allwo's, because his dad is in tough times too. So Allwo's makes sense to be his dad. And then Quarrelman, because, well, he quarreled with just about everybody he met. So, kind of fun. Heaven's power in the west wind drove me this way from Sicania off my course. My ship lies in a barren cove beyond the town there. As for Odysseus, now is the 5th year since he put to sea and left my homeland, bound for death, you say. So this might be kind of hopeful for Laertes to hear, because 20 years has gone by, but that means 5 years ago Odysseus was still alive. Yet land birds flying from starboard crossed his bow, a lucky augury, So we parted joyously in hope of friendly days and gifts to come. So again, Odysseus throws in one more thing that's supposed to be kind of good luck, to have the birds crossing his bow, which means he should have a good voyage. A cloud of pain had fallen on Laertes. Scooping up handfuls of the sunburnt dust, he sifted it over his gray head and groaned. And the groan went to the son's heart. A twinge prickling up through his nostrils warned Odysseus he could not watch this any longer. He leaped and threw his arms around his father, kissed him, and said, "Oh, father, I am he, 20 years gone, and here I've come again to my own land." So finally, Odysseus couldn't stand it anymore. And you know that feeling you get when you're about to cry. So Odysseus is feeling like, oh no, I'm going to start crying. And so instead, he's thinking it's time to tell Laertes the truth. "Hold back your tears, no grieving. I bring good news, though still we cannot rest. I killed the suitors to the last man. Outrage and injury have been avenged." So quickly, in just those 2 lines, he tells how he killed the suitors, and that's the good news that he brings. Laertes turned and found his voice to murmur, "If you are Odysseus, my son, come back. Give me some proof, a sign to make me sure." His son replied, "The scar, then, first of all. Look, here's the wild boar's flashing tusk wounded me on Parnassus. Do you see it? You and my mother made me go that time to visit Lord Autolycus, her father, for gifts he promised years before in Ithaca. Again, more proof. Let's say the trees you gave me on this revetted plot of orchard once. I was a small boy at your heels, wheedling amid the young trees while you named each one. You gave me 13 pear, 10 apple trees, and 40 fig trees. 50 rows of vines were promised too, each one to bear in turn. Bunches of every hue would hang there ripening, weighed down by the god of summer days." So Odysseus very quickly talks about his scar and these fruit trees that were given to him when he was 13. The old man's knees failed him. His heart grew faint, recalling all that Odysseus calmly told. He clutched his son. Odysseus held him swooning until he got his breath back and his spirit, and spoke again. "Zeus, Father, gods above, you still hold pure Olympus if the suitors paid for their crimes indeed, and paid in blood. But now the fear is in me that all Ithaca will be upon us. They'll send messengers to stir up every city of the islands." So Laertes said, Zeus has got to be in control if the suitors are dead, but what if they all want to get revenge? Odysseus, the great tactician, answered, "Courage, and leave the worrying to me. We'll turn back to your homestead by the orchard. I sent the cowherd, swineherd, and Telemachus ahead to make our noonday meal." Conversing in this vein, they went home, the 2 together, into the stone farmhouse. There, Telemachus and the 2 herdsmen were already carving roast young pork and mixing amber wine. During these preparations, the sickle woman bathed Laertes and anointed him, and dressed him in a new cloak. Then Athena, standing by, filled out his limbs again, gave girth and stature to the old field captain, fresh from the bathing place. His son looked on in wonder at the godlike bloom upon him, and called out happily, "Oh, father, surely one of the gods, who are young forever, has made you magnificent before my eyes." So this time Laertes gets the little shine put on him. "By Father Zeus," missed the line. Clear-headed Laertes faced him, saying, "By Father Zeus, Athena, and Apollo, I wish I could be now, as once I was, commander of the Cephallenians, when I took the walled town Nericos on the promontory. Would God I had been young again last night, with armor on me, standing in our hall to fight the suitors at your side." So a bunch of wishes here on Laertes' part. Wishing he were young, wishing he had fought off the suitors with Odysseus. "How many knees I could have crumpled to your joy." While son and father spoke, cowherd and swineherd attended, waiting, for the meal was ready. Soon they were all seated, and their hands picked up the meat and bread. But now old Dolius appeared in the bright doorway with his sons, work-stained from the field. Laertes' housekeeper, who reared the boys and tended Dolius in his bent age, had gone to fetch them in. When it came over them who the stranger was, they halted in astonishment. Odysseus hit an easy tone with them. Said he, "Sit down and help yourself. Shake off your wonder. Here we've been waiting for you all this time, and our mouths watering for a good roast pig." But Dolius came forward, arms outstretched, and kissed Odysseus's hand at the wristbone, crying out, "Dear master, you've returned. You came to us again. How we had missed you. We thought you lost. The gods themselves have brought you. Welcome, welcome. Health and blessings on you. And tell me now, just one thing more. Penelope, does she know yet that you're on the island, or should we send a messenger?" So it's kind of funny. Dolius is asking, "Hey, does Penelope know you're here?" And then Odysseus gruffly said, "Old man, she knows. Is it for you to think of her?" Kind of a rebuff, like, "Hey, of course I told her already." So Dolius quietly took a smooth bench at the table, and in their turn his sons welcomed Odysseus, kissing his hands. Then each went to his chair beside his father. Thus our friends were occupied in Laertes' house at noon. Okay, so now again we switch where we are, and we're going to see what's happening in town with the families of the suitors. Meanwhile, to the four quarters of the town the news ran. You know, this is weird because we don't really know how the news ran, how they find out, but they find out. Bloody death had caught the suitors, and men and women in a murmuring crowd gathered before Odysseus's hall. They gave burial to the piteous dead, or bore the bodies of young men from other islands down to the port, thence to be ferried home. Then all the men went grieving to assembly, and being seated rank by rank, grew still, as old Eupeithes rose to address them. Okay, that is Antinous' dad. And remember, Antinous was the worst of all the suitors, the most evil one. So, of course, he's probably a lot like his son, and he's going to want revenge and thinks Odysseus and Penelope are just bad. He doesn't take responsibility. Pain lay in him like a brand for Antinous. Brand meaning like when you brand cattle or some kind of animal, you know, that would hurt, that burning the flesh. And so that's how great his pain is that Antinous has died. The first man that Odysseus brought down, and tears flowed for his son as he began. "Heroic feats that fellow did for us Achaeans, friends." Okay, he's being sarcastic. "Good spearmen by the shipload he led to war and lost. Lost ships and men, and once ashore again killed these who were the island's pride." So he's trying to show how bad Odysseus really is. "Up with you, after him, before he can take flight to Pylos town or hide at Elis under Epeian law. We'd be disgraced forever, mocked for generations, if we cannot avenge our son's blood, and our brothers. Life would turn to ashes, at least for me. Rather be dead and join the dead. I say, we ought to follow now, or they'll gain time and make the crossing." So he's worried that Odysseus is going to slip away, go to his friends, and they won't be able to get revenge. His appeal, his tears, moved all the gentry listening there. But now they saw the crier and the minstrel come from Odysseus's hall where they had slept. The two men stood before the curious crowd, and Medon said, "Now hear me, men of Ithaca. When these hard deeds were done by Lord Odysseus, the immortal gods were not far off. I saw with my own eyes someone divine who fought beside him in the shape and dress of Mentor. It was a god who shone before Odysseus, a god who swept the suitors down the hall, dying in droves." So this is kind of a warning from Medon that, you know, Odysseus had the gods on his side. Do you really want to go against the gods? At this, pale fear assailed them, and next they heard again the old forecaster, Halitherses Masterides. Alone he saw the field of time past and to come. In his anxiety for them he said, "Ithacans, now listen to what I say. Friends, by your own fault these deaths came to pass." Okay, so first a little bit of a warning and reprimand, you know, like the spare the rod, spoil the child. They really didn't rein their sons in, and so it's their own fault that the suitors all ended up dead. And he also kind of complains they never listened to him or Mentor about what they should have done back when Telemachus called that assembly. You would not heed me, nor the Captain Mentor would not put down the riot of your sons. Heroic feats they did, all wantonly raiding a great man's flocks, dishonoring his queen because they thought he'd come no more. Okay, so now he also uses sarcasm. So just keep in mind sarcasm is big in book 24 here. He's sarcastically saying what heroic feats the suitors did. And it's interesting that both Antinous' dad used heroic feats against Odysseus, and now this seer uses heroic feats in terms of being sarcastic about the suitors. Let matters rest. Do as I urge. No chase, or he who wants a bloody end will find it. In other words, don't go after Odysseus unless you're ready to die. The greater number stood up shouting, "Aye!" But many held fast, sitting all together, in no mind to agree with him. Eupeithes had won them to his side. They ran for arms, clapped on their bronze, and mustered under Eupeithes at the town gate for his mad foray. So you have two groups of Ithacans. Those who want revenge and those who see it as folly. And they're listening for a change. Vengeance would be his, he thought, for his son's murder, but that day held bloody death for him and no return. Okay, so we know what's going to happen. That day held bloody death for him and no return. That means Antinous' dad is doomed to die. It's like the sins of the child are visited upon the father. This point, okay, shift in our viewpoint once again. Now we are going to head up to Mount Olympus and see what's going on there. So very strong in this whole book is the idea that everything's in these gods and goddesses' hands. At this point, querying Zeus, Athena said, "O father of us all and king of kings, enlighten me. What is your secret will? War and battle, worse and more of it? Or can you not impose a pact on both?" The summoner of cloud replied, "My child, why this formality of inquiry? Did you not plan that action by yourself? See to it that Odysseus, on his homecoming, should have their blood." So he's kind of like, Athena, why ask me? You've started all this. Conclude it as you will. There's one proper way, if I may say so. Odysseus's honor being satisfied. So while Zeus says, finish it how you want, he goes on to say there's only one proper way to do it. Let him be king by a sworn pact forever, and we, for our part, will blot out the memory of sons and brothers slain. Interesting. So they'll let Zeus be a king forever, and then they're going to erase the minds of the families of the suitors so that they don't remember the sons and the brothers they lost. As in the old time, let men of Ithaca henceforth be friends, prosperity enough and peace attend them. Athena needed no command, but down in one spring she descended from Olympus, just as the company of Odysseus finished wheat crust and honeyed wine, and heard him say, "Go out, someone, and see if they are coming." So now we're back at the orchard. One of the boys went to the door as ordered and saw the townsmen in the lane. He turned swiftly to Odysseus. "Here they come," he said. "Best arm ourselves, and quickly." All up at once the men took helm and shield, 4 fighting men, counting Odysseus, with Dolius's half-dozen sons. Laertes armed as well, and so did Dolius. Greybeards, they could be fighters in a pinch. Fitting their plated helmets on their heads, they sallied out, Odysseus in the lead. Okay, so you have 4 fighting men. That would be Odysseus, the cowherd, the swineherd, and Telemachus. You have 6 sons of Dolius, so they've never been in battle before. You have 2 old guys, Dolius and Laertes, so that gives you a total of 12 against all these suitor families. Haha, They've got Athena, though, on their side. Now, from the air, Athena, Zeus's daughter, appeared in Mentor's guise, with Mentor's voice. Making Odysseus's heart grow light, he said, to put cheer in his son, Telemachus, you are going into battle against pikemen where hearts of men are tried. I count on you to bring no shame upon your forefathers. In fighting power, we have excelled this lot in every generation. So we have Mentor, who's really Athena. And then again, O is still testing Telemachus. Don't bring any shame on us. Poor Telemachus. Said his son, if you are curious, father, watch and see the stuff that's in me. No more talk of shame. So he wants to prove himself. And old Laertes cried out, Ah, what a day for me, dear gods, to see my son and grandson vie in courage. So Grandpa Laertes is just kind of like, yeah, all right. Athena halted near him, and her eyes shone like the sea. She said, Arcesiades, dearest of all my old brothers in arms, invoke the gray-eyed one and Zeus her father. Heft your spear and make your throw. So she uses an old name for Laertes, and she wants Laertes to have one more great throw, as long as, he calls on her and Zeus. Power flowed into him from Pallas Athena, whom he invoked as Zeus's virgin child, and he let fly his heavy spear. It struck Eupeithes on the cheek plate of his helmet, and undeflected, the bronze head punched through. He toppled, and his armor clanged upon him. So Laertes killed Antinous' dad. Odysseus and his son now furiously closed, laying on with broadswords, hand to hand, and pikes. They would have cut the enemy down to the last man, leaving not one survivor, had not Athena raised a shout that stopped all fighters in their tracks. So it's almost like she wanted to make sure the worst of the troublemakers were killed off. Now hold, she cried. Break off this bitter skirmish and end your bloodshed, Ithacans, and make peace. Their faces paled with dread before Athena, and swords dropped from their hands, unnerved to lie strewing the ground at the great voice of the goddess. Those from the town turned, fleeing for their lives. It sounds like they're really kind of scared that they heard this goddess's voice. But with a cry to freeze their hearts, and ruffling like an eagle on the pounce, the Lord Odysseus reared himself to follow, at which the son of Cronus dropped a thunderbolt smoking at his daughter's feet. Kind of, no more revenge. Here's my thunderbolt. Remember what you promised, Athena. Athena cast a gray glance at her friend and said, Son of Laertes and the gods of old, Odysseus, master of landways and seaways, command yourself. Call off this battle now, or Zeus who views the wide world may be angry. So she basically says, yeah, stop fighting. He yielded to her, and his heart was glad. See, he's killed off the worst. He got rid of the suitors, so he really doesn't have to kill these other Ithacans. Both parties later swore to terms of peace set by their arbiter Athena, daughter of Zeus, who bears the storm cloud as a shield, though still she kept the form and voice of Mentor. So Athena oversees the peace, and that's it. That's the end of the Odyssey. Congratulations, we are finished.